Good morning. We hope you are keeping well this morning. We're going to be talking about boxing. We're going to be talking to Bishop Alphonsus Cullinan about Holy Communions and confirmations. Litter on the Copper Coast. We're going to be talking about John Milan and to Shane O'Sullivan, another former Waterford hurler, about inspiring excellence. In a minute we'll be talking to Vicky Phelan, who has inspired so many people over the past few years, and about the horrendous situation of 200,000 women on waiting lists for cancer tests. We're going to be talking also to Dara Carroll, an amazing story of a man who went to Norway, basically decided to set up a bit of an old life for himself over there, picked up a flame in a sacred part of Norway and has decided to carry the flame all the way back by boat, and he's in Dungarvan at the minute, and he's going to ride a horse from Limerick to the hill of Inchuk, and he's going to put the flame there. It's great. Vicky Phelan, good morning.
Good morning, Damien. My God, that sounds fascinating.
It's a great story. It's a really, really great story. It's a type of story you kind of. I was talking to him briefly yesterday ahead of this morning's thing, and you kind of go, you'd like to take the mick out of somebody, but you don't, because this is so dear to this man's heart. You know, you kind of think, go away. And he's going to transfer the flame from his boat, and he ran out. His engine broke down in the middle of the trip from Norway to Scotland, so he had to stop in Scotland for 2 months to pick periwinkles.
Right. Oh my God.
He doesn't have a girlfriend or a boyfriend, and he doesn't wear very much deodorant, so it'll be an interesting chat. You can have a listen in around 11:15 if you're...
Yeah, God, I certainly will.
Listen, it's great to talk to you again. How are you, by the way?
I'm good, thanks, all good.
Good. Family okay?
Yeah, everyone's fine, and that's the main thing, you know. I suppose that's the thing to remember in all of this. It keeps me going, that, you know, as long as everybody is safe, I'm happy enough to wait to see them. So thankfully that date has come back. I thought it would be the 20th of July, but sure, it looks like now all the travel restrictions will be lifted by the end of June, which is great. So I'll see my parents a lot sooner than I thought, which is really good. Yeah,
a lot of people would know you obviously from your campaign on cervical check, and obviously the book that you've written as well. And after the interview we did last year, so many people very, very high in their praise of the book itself. I was talking to a doctor recently about the delays for lots of different tests, and the headlines this week about 200,000 potentially women, up to 200,000 women waiting for cancer tests are facing more delays because of the lockdown and the ongoing health service restrictions. And this applies across many, many different tests. So GPs will tell you this, that people are coming into their surgeries, they know there's something wrong with them, but the whole system has ground to a halt. Talk to me about the cervical check, and I suppose the cancer test for women in particular, how things have literally ground to a halt.
Yeah, so I mean, the reason I've spoken out so vocally and you know, I've been so kind of pressing on this issue over the last couple of weeks, Damien, is because there doesn't seem to be a plan or a roadmap at all with a date like there are for other things. You know, we know now that you know, travel restrictions are going to be lifted on the 29th of June. Bars and restaurants are going to be open. You know, other things have been able to open, shops open this week, but we still don't know when screening services are going to resume. And that's just not good enough, Damien, not when it's a life-saving service. And, you know, when I talk about cervical screening, you know, it's just not enough for me when our government and our health service tell us, well, you know, if anybody has symptoms, they just go to their GP. The problem I have with that, Damien, is this. If you have symptoms, you know, you probably already have cancer or you're at the early stages of cancer, because if I look at my own situation, when I went to my GP back in 2014 with symptoms, I already had cancer. I had had it for 3 years and didn't know it. So in 2011, when I did have a screen test or a smear test, but it was misread, right? We all know that. But the thing is, it actually did show that I had cancer at that stage, but I didn't know it because I had no symptoms. And this is why I always use my own case as an example, because, you know, screening generally is screening a healthy population. And we know that a lot of those people will be fine and won't, you know, go on to develop cancer. But it does pick up people like me, you know, and people who don't have symptoms and get them at an earlier stage. And we all know from my own case, if I had been picked up in 2011 when my screen test did show that I had cancer, I wouldn't be in the situation I am today, Damien, fighting to keep alive.
Yeah.
And that's the reality.
And the figures are startling still. Like every year in the country, around 300 women are diagnosed with cervical cancer, almost 90 die from the disease. So if you extrapolate that into a quarterly basis, and the fact, I suppose, that tests have been stopped for the last over a 4 or 5 month period, there'll be around 100,000 tests done. There may be, like, this coronavirus is probably going to kill people not of coronavirus. The fact that coronavirus has happened is going to have a knock-on effect, and unfortunately some people are going to die because of this.
Exactly, and as well as people dying, we will also have people being diagnosed at a much later stage than they should have.
Yeah.
That will lead to poor outcomes for the patients. It will cost the health service a lot more because people are going to have more aggressive treatment. So it has a knock-on effect for everything. But I suppose for me, as a patient advocate, I'm advocating for people and patients who are going to have poorer outcomes in all of this, particularly for cervical cancer, because it isn't curable, and that's the reality. If you get diagnosed with this disease at a much later stage, the treatment is horrendous, the outcomes are really bad, and it affects generally young women with young families, or women who won't be able to have families as a result. So that's why I'm constantly kind of coming out and speaking out about this. I know Simon Harris is before the Dáil today to take questions, and I really hope that he's going to announce a date at this stage, because there is a push, not just from me and other advocates, but yesterday the Dublin Well Women clinics, who are the largest smear takers in the country, have also come out backing up calls to get this back up and running as soon as possible.
Yeah, I saw that, and their medical director, Shirley McQuaid, talking about, did you agree, Vicky, that the testing had to be stopped in March, or was it just a case of, okay, we don't know how this COVID is going to affect everybody and we'll just see how it goes? Obviously, everything ground to a halt effectively in March, didn't it?
It did, and I think people understand that everything had to be paused because we didn't know what way we're going to be affected by COVID. We were looking at images in Italy and hoping to God that we weren't going to end up like that, and thankfully we didn't. And our government have done a lot of things right, Damien, but they've also done a lot of things that I don't agree with. And one of them is the fact that we now don't have any idea when screening is going to resume. In Australia, they didn't stop screening services; they just curtailed them. In New Zealand, they're already back up and running. In the UK, obviously they're not, and they're our nearest neighbour, but they've had a far worse situation with COVID than we have had. But, I wrote a piece in the Sunday Independent 2 weeks ago, and I mentioned that there are some types of screening that can be done as self-screening samples. Like bowel screen is a self-sampling service, so people can have a bowel movement at home and send a sample into a lab to be done. So, that's something that could be resumed safely. And there's also a situation now where HPV smear testing could be done at home as well. They were piloting a situation like this over in the UK, mainly for hard-to-reach women who weren't coming in to present for smears. But, we are going to have to learn to live with COVID-19 until we have a vaccine. So maybe our government and our health service needs to look at other ways of doing this that's far safer. And maybe, the self-sampling could be done for people who are at high risk, so that they're not coming into the service, and start off like that. But there are other ways of doing this. It's not impossible. And at the end of the day, we already know from a number of studies that have come out that deaths from non-COVID health issues are going to be much higher than what we have from COVID. So that needs to change.
Can I just ask you, how long would it take if an announcement is made for a resumption of testing? Could it start tomorrow? I wouldn't think so. I'd say it's going to take a couple of weeks. At the same time, I know Shirley McQuaid did mention yesterday that they are actually already doing screening. They resumed back on the 18th of May on a pilot basis because, as we all know, we were supposed to move to a situation where we had HPV testing, which is much more accurate than the Pap smear. So the Well Woman Clinic started piloting that in May because they hadn't actually started doing it. And they were starting to see a small number of patients, and they came out yesterday and said this is possible. It is possible to do this. We just need to think about it, and obviously we're going to have smaller numbers, but it's just not good enough that we don't do it at all. And I do remember listening to the radio a couple of weeks ago. I can't remember what the gynecologist's name was, but she was an Irish gynecologist, and she said that there was no evidence to show that it is not safe for smear testing to be carried out, that COVID is not transmitted through genital fluids.
So, we need to look at the research, and if that's the case, then start bringing people back slowly.
Okay, very good. Finally, Vicky, your own situation, you're keeping good?
I am, yeah, I'm really well, thank God.
Great.
Really looking forward now to seeing my parents. That's kind of keeping me going at the moment, because, we're now in June and I know I'll see them at the end of the month. But it has been hard. I mean, it's been hard on everybody. I know this week now, or last week was it, we had the kind of rules relaxed about meeting up with 4 people outside of your family. So actually we live in a very small estate, so my son was able to actually meet some of the kids from the estate, and that has made a huge difference to him because, I think the mental health fallout from all of this is going to be huge as well, Damien, to be honest. I think I was really worried about my son there for a couple of weeks. He's only 9. And, my daughter is 14, and they don't get on, needless to say. And, he had nobody to play with. And I just think it's so unnatural for children that, this is going to have a huge knock-on effect about the way they play going forward if this continues for too much longer, where they have to kind of, all they can do at the moment is play football because they're at distance. And, yeah, it's just really hard to watch it, isn't it, I think, as a parent?
Yeah, it is really. Listen, lovely to talk to you again. Mind yourself, okay?
Thanks very much, Damien.
See you, Vicky. God bless. Take it easy. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Vicky Phelan there, cervical check campaigner. A lot of texts coming in about this already. Damien, what did Vicky have first? I just had another smear in Waterford last week and I'm wondering if it's the same type of thing. I'm 48 years of age. I want to go back and make sure that this gets sorted. I'm sure you do, because it is one of those issues that is so, so important. Anne texted in about masks thrown on the streets in Dungarvan yesterday. Please, if anybody has masks, says Anne, make sure you put it into the bin. Another text, my daughter got her first HPV vaccination before Christmas, was due to get a second one in February as part of the school immunisation process, but the HSE didn't get back to administer the second one before lockdown. Will the vaccination process need to start again? I don't know. We'll try and find out from a GP about that, or from the HSE what is the situation on that. John phoned into 051 846 123 to say all physios finished in March. It finished in March. He's still waiting to get a call back. He can't understand why it's not happening when people are back to work, shops are open, etc. Keep your texts and comments coming in. 083 3333 975. That's our text and WhatsApp number. Or Audrey is on 051 846 123. You can follow us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter. You can send us an email. You can write me a letter. An old letter in an envelope and a stamp. Next, we're going to be talking about boxing briefly, and we're going to talk to Michael O'Toole from the Star newspaper about the horrible Kinahans who were involved in this disgraceful setup of a fight. Now, there's a lot of people that like sport in Ireland and abroad. A lot of people that like boxing as well. Some people don't, but those that do, they're very passionate about it, and a lot of people give their time, personal time to it, in terms of coaching, in terms of refereeing, and helping young people get involved, and maybe discipline and fitness and all those different things that come with it. But there's so many of them that are aghast at the video by world champion Tyson Fury yesterday, thanking international crime boss Daniel Kinahan for brokering a bout against Anthony Joshua. It's been met by, I suppose, astonishment by many different people. Larry has texted in already. Damien, it's very easy to launder money in different sports, and particularly in fights of this magnitude. So is it a money laundering thing? Obviously, Daniel Kinahan would say no. He's involved in all this and he thinks that it's great, and it's great to be involved in everything like that. He said. So the two-time world champion, Tyson Fury, one of the most recognisable stars in the sports, he announced this deal that he's informed by Kinahan of a 2-fight deal with Anthony Joshua, and it's planned to be the biggest fight in world history. Talking about $1 billion. I think, was it $1 billion they were talking about in terms of all the different issues. So I'm going to talk to Michael O'Toole from the Star newspaper. They have a very, very strong line on this morning. Michael, good morning.
Morning, Damien.
Michael, you've made a bold statement in the Star today. Talk to me about why you've done this.
My editor, Deise Gibson, was... well, first, we're a boxing newspaper. We always have been. So boxing is very important to our readers and to the journalists who work in the paper. So I think Deise... I'm not going to say he thought long and hard about it, but he definitely thought hard about it because it's very important to our brand. He took the decision because somebody has to make a stand. Daniel Kinahan, as the editorial says, is a mobster, and his gang have been involved in at least 16 killings. There have been 18 killings in the Kinahan Hutch feud, well, it's more really a Kinahan onslaught against associates of the Hutch family. And 16 of those have come from the Kinahan gang. And it's blatant what Daniel Kinahan is doing. He's been trying to reinvent himself, or he has been moving to reinvent himself for several years. And somebody has to say stop. Now, we're in the grand scheme of things. The Irish Daily Star does not have a global reach. We're not CNN. We're not the New York Times. We're not the Financial Times. But we're an important paper in Ireland. And we want people to know that we're not going to give any coverage to these fights between Fury and Joshua because of the involvement of Daniel Kinahan.
A lot of our listeners on this programme, we've covered boxing a lot on the programme. Again, I have a young lad that's involved in boxing, and anybody that's listening to this morning, what should they be thinking as a boxing supporter, as a boxing fan?
Where's the sport going? Look, I mean, what Kinahan is doing is blatant. He is trying to become one of, he already is practically there. He is trying to become one of the main, most important movers and shaking in boxing, which is, I presume, and look, I'm not really into boxing, but I presume it's a multi-million, almost probably it could be €1 billion business. And there are huge purses and there are huge profits to be made. And he's not in this for the good of his health. He's in it for his reputation, and he's in it to make money. So, the question needs to be asked, do boxing fans, do people involved in boxing, and do journalists involved covering boxing think that this is acceptable, that this man can come in, take over huge swathes of the business and become one of the most important players? This question has to be asked because for years, Daniel Kinahan has been involved in drugs. His gang has been central to murders in Ireland and Spain. And we just don't think we think that's not good enough.
And what about the fact that they'd say he's never been convicted of anything?
Journalism is about speaking truth to power. Sometimes we just have to, I do know this, Damien, sometimes we just have to grab ourselves and go for it. And that's what we're doing. We want people to know. Everybody knows in Ireland, everybody knows about Daniel Kinahan. I was going to say the dogs in the street know, but the guards in the street know, and the people in the street know about Daniel Kinahan. And let me tell you, I know this because it was explained to me by someone with knowledge. Daniel Kinahan does not care about Ireland. Daniel Kinahan, every newspaper, every media organisation in Ireland has been writing and talking about Daniel Kinahan since at least 2015. He doesn't care about Ireland. He cares about Britain. So the battlefield really is not Ireland. He's lost Ireland, and he really, as I say, couldn't care about that. He cares about his reputation in Britain. So it's up. I'm not a British journalist. I'm an Irish crime journalist. I'm not a British boxing journalist. It's up to the British media to ask the hard questions of this man. I was horrified. The last few months, one British newspaper called Daniel Kinahan controversial, and then another British newspaper in the last 24 hours said he was sometimes controversial. Where's the due diligence? Where are the British journalists asking the questions? This is the last chance that the British journalists have to take this man on, because if they don't now, if they accept it now, he will concrete his position, he will fix his position, and the questions won't be asked, and they'll look back and go, you know what, this is just like all those cases in the past. And Damien, I know defamation laws are much more strict in Ireland than they are in Britain. British journalists can be much more aggressive, and it just has not been happening in relation to Kinahan in the last few months. And this strategy has been going on for at least a year.
Finally, Michael, you've
questioned it.
You've covered a lot of murders. We've had you on this programme quite regularly. How does this all make you feel?
Well, I'm flabbergasted, I'll be honest. I was aware of the strategy. We've had rap songs written about Kinahan. We've had docudramas that Kinahan was the centre of and must have cost several €100,000, highly polished. We've had people online talking about what a great man Daniel Kinahan is. We've had people like Bob Arum. As I say, I'm not really into boxing, but I know he's a big player in boxing, talking about how trustworthy and how great Kinahan is. So I've been observing this from the perspective of a crime reporter, and I've really been shocked. But this is clearly what this has all been about. This strategy has all been about getting him normalised and making him acceptable, the acceptable face of boxing. This is the last chance that people have to challenge it.
Michael O'Toole, thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Thanks.
Thanks, Michael. Appreciate it. And Sean from Tramore has just texted in, how can Daniel Kinahan be involved in organising the biggest heavyweight fight in the last 30 years? He was named in court as a leader of a drugs organisation around the world, and now Tyson Fury is thanking him for getting this undisputed title fight organised for 2021. And he quotes the Irish Times report, the jailing of Kinahan foot soldier Mark Capper for 7.5 years will do little to damage the €1 billion criminal empire run by Daniel Kinahan and his brother Christy Jr. However, the comments made by Mr Justice Tony Hunt during Capper's sentencing are another blow, albeit minor, to Daniel Kinahan's attempt to whitewash his reputation on the international boxing scene. The judge said he accepted the evidence of the Gardaí that the Kinahan organised crime group, known colloquially as the Cartel, was involved in organised drugs and firearms dealing on an international scale, and that it used, quotation marks, execution-style murders to protect its interest. Execution-style murders to protect its interest. What do you think? Let us know. 083 3333 975. Now, welcome back to the programme. If you have any text or comments, we're going to be talking to Bishop Alphonsus Cullinan, not Cullinan, as I said earlier, in a few minutes. Firstly, a couple of texts regarding cervical testing. Seriously, people would have banished Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael to oblivion in any other European country. The amount of scandals under their watch, particularly now with all these women going through turmoil waiting on these tests. Shame on the politicians. If a dentist can stick his hands in a patient's mouth, why can't screenings be done? They should be able to be done. And a lot of people texting in about the boxing. I'll come back to that in a few minutes. Bishop, good morning.
Good morning, Damien, and morning to all the listeners.
Thanks very much for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Tell us, how are you and how are your parishioners? We saw the exposition of the Blessed Sacrament in different parts of the city and county.
Yes.
And it's been a very strange time for everybody.
Very strange time for everyone, absolutely. Very difficult for some, less difficult for others. Must be very difficult for anybody, with a tendency to depression, for example, being confined, being stuck in. Thanks be to God, things are loosening up. And, I think that is a blessing for people to be able to gather, because we all have a real deep human need for contact, for joining with others. And I think that the pandemic has really taught us that we are social beings. We need others need us. We have learnt that, and there's been a beautiful outpouring as well in so many ways across society, across the country, across the diocese, of people, helping neighbours, putting a note in the door or phoning them, or just waving at the window as they pass by, or whatever, an expression of solidarity. So this pandemic has brought out beautiful things as well, while at the same time is extremely difficult. I mean, I'm finding it tough, but, at the same time, look, we move on, we take it day by day, and we realise that, God is with us in this.
What is the situation regarding Holy Communions and confirmations? Yes,
well, on the 29th of June, thanks be to God, the government is allowing us, and the health authorities, who are doing their best, I have no doubt, and are doing a good job, by and large. On the 29th, which is a Monday, public masses will be allowed. So that means that on that day, I presume, people will be delighted to come back to Mass. Now, public Mass. Now, each church, because of the 2-metre rule, in each parish, the priest has gathered a small group of people around him to estimate how many people can safely be accommodated in the church building. So the number will be greatly reduced, something to between 10 and 20% of the normal capacity of the church. So that is a huge reduction. So people will have to have patience. And I think that on those first days from the 29th on, from that Monday on, we will all be seeing, how is this going to play out?
What about Holy Communion?
Yes. You mean the actual First Holy Communion?
No, the actual in a Mass.
In a Mass, yes. People are requested to walk up in line, those going to Holy Communion, keeping the 2-metre distance. And the priest, who it's recommended that he wears a face mask, and gives Holy Communion on the hand to the person. Now, you're in front of the person for two seconds.
Less even, yeah.
Absolutely. So the health advice that we have got is, that the risk of infection is absolutely minimal. There are some priests as well who, in actual fact, have got a screen, a Perspex screen, made for their churches. That is another possibility. And for those people who are nervous about going up to Holy Communion and that, well, we would like to assure them that, we're taking all of the precautions, the same as here in your studio, with the sanitizer, we have the dispensers, we have the churches will be marked out as to which seats are to be used, etc., etc. So we're trying to make it as beautiful a celebration as we can under the circumstances, which is not going to be easy, because people will be nervous, I'm sure. But I think that we will get used to that.
And can I ask you, in terms of,
yes.
I'll come back to the dates for Holy Communion and confirmation in a minute,
yes.
potentially.
Yes.
What about confession? How will confession proceed?
Yes. Well, in actual fact, last Saturday week we had confessions across the diocese, and they were open-air confessions for the most part, and actually went very well. We had 9 venues around the whole diocese, and of course the weather was beautiful, so we had, including myself, I was out and was kept busy. So that is one possibility. Another, of course, is to have confession in a corner in the church, keeping a good distance away from the others. So that is another way of doing confession, apart from outdoor. And I myself have done a few drive-in confessions where I've sat in a chair and the person in my front garden, and the people drove up and they sat in their car and I stayed 2 meters and they got their confession.
Tell me about the dates potentially for communion and confirmation.
Yes, well now that is another day's work, of course, because the numbers which we will be able to accommodate in a church will be greatly reduced. So we would be asking families to have patience, and I know that there are so many children out there, and I've got letters from them and from teachers and so on, and emails, and wondering when is it going to happen. So it certainly is not going to be any time soon. It's probably, I would say, the earliest around September time, when we are asking families with children for First Holy Communion or confirmation to fill in a form which will be up on our diocesan website, expressing their interest in receiving Holy Communion or confirmation, giving their contact details, which is all GDPR approved, provided that they do it specifically for that particular sacrament, giving their permission then for the priest to contact them, and therefore to be sending out stuff for continued formation of the child and the family indeed, and then to be choosing dates when, we could accommodate a small number of families at a time. And then for confirmation, giving the parish priest, giving the parish priest the authority to do the confirmations. So this is going to take time, Damien.
And we'll wait and see what happens.
Exactly.
Of course, yeah.
Yes.
Can I ask you, somebody just texted in about the choirs. Will choirs be back, or are you going to hold off that for the minute?
That would be difficult, but you could certainly have an organist and a cantor.
Yes.
Keeping their distance. But for a choir of people, 10, 15, 20 people, that would be, unless you're talking about a huge church, that would be extremely difficult. So a small choir, very small choir, or a cantor. But it's lovely to have music at Mass.
I know numbers attending masses and churches vary and have varied over the years, but
sure.
If a situation did arise that a church was full,
yeah,
what happens then? Because the priest is obviously in the sacristy preparing for Mass. Is there somebody at the front door saying, I'm sorry, you can't come in? Like, are you going to stop people possibly going to Mass?
That is what we're going to have to do, really. Now, it's not a question of stopping. It's a question of looking at your parish, and perhaps, Damien, a parish priest with his group dividing the parish into, townlands or housing estates or whatever, and inviting people from that particular townland or housing estate to come to Mass on such and such a day, and to see if it works that way. We certainly will need ushers, and we will need people at the front door to say, I'm very sorry, we just can't safely fit anymore. So some churches, for example, have outdoor speakers.
I was just going to say that.
Yeah, and that's a possibility. And that has worked in other places. And for example, priests have had the experience in these past few weeks of a large funeral where they had a loudspeaker outside where people were dispersed, in the car park, but they could hear the Mass.
What about weddings?
Yeah, weddings are possible, but again, of course,
weddings back on the agenda
after the 29th.
They are. So if people want to get married in a church, again, working with the local priest.
Yes.
Then they may well be able to get married in July and August.
That could be possible indeed. But obviously, families getting married, you want to have your friends and family in big numbers there, and to have such a small gathering may not be the kind of day that they're really looking forward to.
I know, and people talk about the afters and all that, and that has to come into yet. But in terms of the church, then, once the social distancing measures that are applicable for Mass, again, a wedding is a Mass, so there's the same criteria.
The same criteria, trying to keep people safe, and at the same time, giving the opportunity to people to get back to Mass and to receive Jesus again. And I know that there's a great longing out there, and I've got so many letters and calls, but thanks be to God, we're getting there, and I'm looking forward to the day with great joy.
Bishop Alphonsus Cullinan, thank you very much.
Thank you. God bless you and all your listeners.
Now, in a minute, I'm going to be talking to Sean Corcoran and Michael Murphy regarding the Copper Coast. A couple of texts in first about boxing. Yes, Daniel is involved in notorious crime family, but boxing has always been involved by promoters who have very shady past. It's no different in any sport. Only difference now, it's done by men in suits. He's never been convicted, is now running a boxing promotion company. Others saying again, different people in the past in boxing were involved in crimes. Could you please ask the Bishop, is he still pushing ahead with the sale of the hall in Carrick, which, while we're talking about boxing, will put St Nick's Boxing Club, who looks after in excess of 60 children, on the road with no facilities? So is this being driven by money? I'm sorry I didn't get a chance to do that text. I get to that text when I was doing the interview with Bishop Alphonsus. A lot of people saying, thank you, Bishop, for coming on. Others asking, as regards to giving out communion in churches, wearing a mask is one thing. However, handling the host defeats the purpose of hygiene. Let's talk about hygiene on the streets and on the beaches. Sean and Michael, good morning, gentlemen.
Morning, how are you, Damien?
How are you getting on? Good, thanks, lads. Litter on the Copper Coast. Sean, you were highlighting this in the last few weeks, and thanks very much for doing it. And I know a lot of people have been very grateful to it, and also Michael as well. 10 of the bins have now been returned by the council. Tell me about the situation. How bad did it get?
Good morning, Damien. Yeah, I suppose, from my perspective, I released a photograph just before the bank holiday there, the Copper Coast during the lockdown, the 2 kilometres and then the 5 kilometres and beyond now, thankfully, has been used enormously. Visitors, and thankfully now even anyone from the county is coming out to the Copper Coast, and we're open. The Copper Coast is open, so there's a good news story. Yes, 10 of the bins are back, which is great, but I suppose the situation, to go back to what we had before the bank holiday, huge crowds, 50, 60, 70 cars lined up outside Kilmurran Cove. Bunman the same, Stradbally and along. So huge traffic were coming to spend their time here on the beautiful coastline. And what we had was a situation back in February where the bins were removed from the area by the council. Now, we made some representations locally and with the council, but there was no sign of the bins coming back. So just before the bank holiday, I released a photograph of 49 cars actually lined up in front of Kilmurran, and Dimphna Nugent from the News and Star interviewed me, and my friend Jim Griffin, the councillor Jim Griffin, kind of ran with it as well in terms of talking to the council about what's the situation here with the public bins. So while there was that amount of people here, sadly to say, there was a lot of waste. There was no bins in place where they normally are, and there was a lot of waste, public waste being scattered around. So that's why Michael and I and a bigger team now have decided to take action. To
take action, yeah. Now, Michael Murphy, you work for Focus Ireland, I know, and you're chair of the Labour Party. You're going to be running in the Cummeragh area for Ger Barron seat, and you're living in Bunman. 10 of the bins, as I say, have been returned by the council. So this local group you've got together, and you've been doing a beach clean-up, Michael, have you?
Yeah, we absolutely have, Damien. So we had a beach clean-up last week and 25 people showed up, which was fantastic. Now the distance has kind of been increased. We're holding another beach clean on Sunday morning in Bunman. We're meeting at 11 o'clock outside the Engine House Bar and Cafe. I suppose this issue is one that it's fantastic that we're being able to raise it, but I think it highlights a kind of generalised kind of consideration that we need to be increasing the fact that we have one of the most beautiful coastlines in the country, if not in the world, along the Copper Coast. People are coming out to enjoy it, which is absolutely fantastic. The litter is one issue. It's something that we're dealing with, and we hope that will be addressed going forward. But I suppose we should take this opportunity and this new community group that we have to kind of really try and put out a strong statement to suggest that the Copper Coast needs to be invested in correctly, it needs to be funded appropriately, and we need to be kind of appreciating the beauties that we have on our doorstep. If you think about what the Greenway has done for County Waterford, it's absolutely incredible. And if we were in a position to be able to extend the Greenway from Kilmacthomas out to Bunman, could you imagine what that would do for the Copper Coast to spread left?
Yeah, it's a very good point. I raised it last year when I was in Bunman doing a piece about extending that, and this being another spoke to coin a phrase from the Greenway.
Absolutely.
How much money do you think, or is there any costings being done on this, Michael? Do you know? Because the government would say, and the different groups in the department would say, well, we have invested a fair bit of money in the Copper Coast over the years. Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, so when we say costings, we'd be way too early to even start suggesting figures for it. But if you just to try and give a picture of what's being done at the moment, there's community groups that will be in the Copper Coast that we're engaging with that would have the opportunity to apply for funding, and similarly in Kilmacthomas. Then we have to talk about the kind of EU funding that would have been brought in to do the Greenway. Now, to be brutally honest with you, this isn't something that we think is going to be done in the next year or the year after that. But if you consider the conversation was started about the Greenway however many years ago, 10, 15 years ago, and people were laughing at the likes of Ger Barron when he suggested it. And now look what it's done. If you have to start the conversation here today to try and get some public interest in it and see, because at the end of the day, these things are using public money. And if people from citizens and people within the community are interested in this, then that's where it will start from.
Yeah.
So I suppose, to answer your question, costings haven't been done, not at all, and we would need to approach the landowners and have a proper chat and see, right, is this something that you would be happy to facilitate? But I suppose the conversation has to start, you know.
It does have to start, yeah, and you're putting your money where your mouth is, and you're putting your feet on the ground and boots on the ground, as they say. Sean, you've done an awful lot in terms of pushing the Copper Coast, I suppose, image. Is there anything more that the authorities can do that Michael is saying? Even like, let's talk about costings. Let's talk about, like we're talking about discovering Waterford now. Next week or the week after is going to be a launch about tourism and the idea of promoting areas. So that balance between getting people to come to the Copper Coast and yet to do so in a respectful way, it's going to be a difficult one maybe?
Well, I suppose I certainly, as you know, my family have been living here 10 years and we're stakeholders in terms of we have the art school here as well. We do a lot of collaborative events where we bring groups of people to beaches and different environmental, like I'm an environmental artist myself. So like the environment here needs to be nurtured and we need to, stand up and be proud of our environment and protect this and be guardians of the Copper Coast. So I'm not talking about it, this isn't a vigilante group. This is not, we really just need to kind of stand up and be proud and say, look, and what Michael is saying about maybe learning from what the Greenway has done, and even with the idea of connecting the Greenway, with funding. I know the council are doing great work in terms of the idea of a Blue Way as well, that, initiatives from Dunmore East to Balmacore are well underway in terms of walking along the cliff. And I know that the council are looking at, there's funding applications being made at the moment for European money, I believe, to even to showcase even a pilot scheme out this direction, maybe possibly even from Ballyvooney down to Bunman. That's been spoken about, and there's surveys and studies and applications being made on that. So it's only a matter of time before the Copper Coast gets turned around in terms of the beauty and incredible facility that it is. So we need all the stakeholders behind it, including the council and the funding and our local representatives as well. So, for me, the most exciting potential of this area would be the idea of allowing people to visit it in a very sustainable way, giving them access along the coast, and then the stakeholders can, the businesses can thrive, small businesses can thrive, and we have a fantastic status here. It's a UNESCO World Global Geopark. It's phenomenal what we have, the potential here. Now, I have to say, I wouldn't like it to be turned into a Wild Atlantic Way. I don't want to see hundreds of buses coming through here every day. I would love to see it being done in a very, very simple, sustainable way where the character of the area, the people and the culture, the style of life that we have here is nurtured as part of that development.
Yeah, no, very good point. And it is this idea of the killing the goose that laid the golden egg. And can I just remind people again, Michael, people can turn up this Sunday morning, is it, for the clean-up?
This Sunday morning at 11 o'clock outside the Engine House Bar. We'll have a chat. All social distancing rules obviously will be adhered to. We'll have a chat and really just trying to get the community involved and hearing people's ideas and seeing what people think about how we can do exactly what Sean just suggested. How can we bring more people to the Copper Coast, create more local employment and do it in a sustainable and fair way.
And finally, both of you, Michael, briefly, if bins were removed, would they take their rubbish home? For example, there's no bins in Mahon Falls or Kilcloney Wood, says this person. What do you think?
That's the argument, I suppose, and that's something that needs to be figured out. When the bins were taken away, say for example, when over half of them were taken away, the ones that remained were just filled up just twice as fast, and rubbish was left by the side of them.
Yeah.
I know we've been talking to the council trying to get signage coming down, so I know the environmental officer and the council is in talks to try and get that down. But I suppose there's loads of different ways that the refuse management can be addressed. And I suppose the council are working on it. It's just to try and really highlight the fact that we really are passionate about this, we care about this, and we want to keep the pedal on the metal until it's really dealt with appropriately. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do, exactly, yeah. Sean, Michael, listen, thanks for joining us, gentlemen.
Thanks, Damien.
Well done and fair play to you. Take care, lads. Thanks very much. Good. Sean Corcoran there and Michael Murphy. And if you're interested, you've heard them saying it's Bunman this Sunday morning. So going to be doing a clean-up this Sunday morning. There's around 255 people on that Facebook page already and many more joining. Number of people texting in already about the bang last night. Anyone any idea what the huge bang was that rocked through Ferrybank? Richard Flynn mentioned it at around 10:30, I think, last night. People were saying, was it a plane? Was it a sonic boom? What was it? Other people saying funny things about what it might have been. But it was heard far and wide. So we've been on to the guards about that and seeing if there was any idea. People asking, is there an internet outage in Blenheim Heights at the minute? A number of people texting about rubbish and bins, and if the bins were removed, there'd be no rubbish left. Difficult one. Can the guards now have the authority to fine you if you pass the 20 kilometres at the minute? Says this texter, no, they don't, but they will be advising you and they'll be saying, listen, hold on a second, you shouldn't be going past the 20 kilometres. So they want to insist and promote the social distancing guidelines and all the regulations that have been put in place and that are still there.